With Hashem's help, I'd like to speak about the last element, or one of the other elements of Purim that we haven't yet spoken about. We spoke last time about Matanas Lavyonim and about Shalach Manas, and the relationship between those things, really particularly the relationship between Matanas Lavyonim and Megillah. And we spoke about how the world in and of itself is, in a sense, an Evyoin. The world is just pure physicality, and people interact with the world in such a way where they don't see that this world is bursting with life and spirit, and physicality in and of itself is yearning for an infusion of spirit from the heavenly realm, from beyond, from the source, from the Siba, or the Misavev, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, who's causing every cause. And on Purim, through the reading of the Megillah, we learned that opens up tremendous megadoses, channels, through the content of the Megillah that speaks all about the way in which really every single detail of our lived experience in this world is guided by HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and Hashem's hashkacha is guiding everything that happens to us personally, collectively. And through that, there's a matana, so to speak, that's given to the Evyain of this worldliness, that then gets channeled into our actual matanas Evyanim that we're giving to others, because it's all a reflection of those sort of meta structures in a larger sense. We spoke about that, and then the first time that we learned, we spoke about the different aspects of the halachas with regard to Kriyas and Megillah. And ultimately, I think the main point over there was to recognize and realize, which connects to the second shir, about the way in which really everything that we're reading about shouldn't be lemafreya, shouldn't be something that happened a long time ago, but it's something that we're re-experiencing every year anew. Vayam Mahem is happening mamish bazman hazeh. And we have the opportunities on Purim to re-experience those same energies that existed in the first time that they came down, so to speak, on that year, in the nace of the Purim story, in our own individual lives and Be'ezus Hashem, our collective lives. We can experience those miracles again, and we should be conscious of that. So I want to speak now just a little bit, with Hashem's help, the little bit that we have, about the inyan of the Shasiya, of the Besume Bepuria, that we know the Gemara tells us a very strange thing, and the Rishonim and Achronim will discuss exactly what it means, and why are these Lashonos used, and how does one fulfill Chayiv Inish Besume Bepuria Adalo Yada? Is it actually drinking until a person doesn't know? Is it maybe drinking a little bit more, Yosim Limuda, what that means, maybe going to sleep, etc., all the different approaches that there are. But ultimately, we find that there's this nikuda of reaching a place of ad lo yada. However one does that, whether it's through drinking, whether it's through taking a little nap, whatever it is that a person does, there's an inyan on Purim to get to a point of ad lo yada. And what's the depth of that? So there's so much to talk about over here. I'll just try to be mekatzer just as much as we can. The Svar Makdashim tell us, based on the Gemara Haman min atayra minayin, and the Gemara tells us Hamin ha'etz. Haman is rooted in the Eitz Hadas Tov Ra, when HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, is it true that you've eaten from the tree of knowledge of good and evil? And the Svarim say that really, in a certain sense, although Amalek shows up much later in the Torah, we spoke about Vayave Amalek, after Am Yisrael asked, Hayesh Hashem b'kerbeinu im ayin, is HaKadosh Baruch Hu with us or not? Vayave Amalek, and that's where Amalek really shows up. But the Zohar Kodesh already implies that Amalek's spirit, so to speak, was present in the Nachash HaKadmoni already in Gan Eden. That's really the primordial expression of this inyan of Amalek already in Gan Eden. And what happened to Adam and Chava personally happened later on collectively to Am Yisrael as they journeyed to Har Sinai. And we find that because finally at Har Sinai collectively, Paska Zuamasam. The Gemara in Shabbos tells us that the Zuama, the impurity that was present within Am Yisrael, Paska, it ceased. Where did that Zuama come from? And the Gemara tells us that that there was some kind of relationship that the Nachash had with Chava, where he injected within the mother of all humanity, with the mother of Klal Yisrael, injected a Zuama, and that ceased when Klal Yisrael collectively rectified the Chet Adam and Chava standing, like we spoke before, Vayichan Sham Yisrael Neged Ahar, and that rectified that Zuama. Fascinatingly enough, the Gemara tells us, or rather the Pasuk tells us, in the conjugation between Vayave Amalek and the words that come just before it, which say that Klal Yisrael, like I mentioned, asked, Hayesh Hashem b'kerbeinu im ayin, is HaKadosh Baruch Hu with us? Is he not with us? We know that that's an expression of Safek. Safek, of course, Gematria Amalek. And of course, we'd expect that the very next words in the Torah should say Vayave Amalek, because they had a Safek, and they were asking, Hayesh and ayin, is HaKadosh Baruch Hu with us or not? So HaKadosh Baruch Hu comes to Chava, and Hashem says, did you eat from the tree that I told you not to eat from? And what does Chava say? She says, after HaKadosh Baruch Hu came to Adam, he said, go to Chava. She says, Hanacha sheshiyani. It says, the snake fooled me, the snake tricked me. And the tzaddikim say, I believe it's a chidah, and it could also be a ben Ish Chai, I believe both. And now I'm thinking maybe it's a B'nai Yissaschar. I told you I'm not prepared, so I don't know. It could be either of those three, but it's one of those three. Now I'm thinking it might actually be the B'nai Yissaschar, but I'm sure they all knew it anyway. Question is who wrote it. A fascinating thing that I think that the B'nai Yissaschar, I think it is the B'nai Yissaschar writes, that the word Hishiyani, which means the Nachash tricked me, is a conjugation of the two words Hayesh and Ayin. Hayesh Hashem b'kirbeinu im Ayin. Is a Kadosh Baruch Hu with us or not? Amalek. So where does Haman come from? Was Haman Agagi, who's the paradigm of Amalek, is rooted, Hamin Ha'etz. He's rooted in the tree. Because that's the Inyan of Amalek, and that's the Inyan of the suffix that's caused by Amalek. And that's the Zuama that comes into Chava and into Klal Yisrael, that ultimately when we stand by our Sinai, we rectify that. When we overcome Vayachlesh Yeshuas Amalek Lefi Charev, when there's this battle and Am Yisrael prevail, and Am Yisrael prevail through Moshe Rabbeinu's hands that are raised to Shemayim, as the Gemara and the Mishnah tells us, it wasn't his hands that won the war, but it was when his hands were raised heavenward, Klal Yisrael looked up and they saw their leader pointing them above, and they recognized that they have to have an infusion of emunah. But what is it that Adam, that Nachash, which is Amalek, causes to happen to Adam and Chava? Ultimately, it's a pegam fundamentally in emunah. And we see again that how do we win the battle with Amalek? As Moshe Rabbeinu's hands that are spread, the pasuk says, "Vayiyadav emunah." His hands were faithful, and the Targum Onkelos says, "Pirshan b'tzila." His hands were spread in prayer. But vayiyadav emunah, that's how you win the battle. But that's really what the affront and what the attack of Amalek is to try to impact our faith, to cause us to fall into Suffolk. But fascinatingly enough, these are some of my favorite Purim Torahs. Just tell you, just very briefly, an amazing thing. The Gemara, the tzaddikim tell us that there are two very particular words in the Torah that have large letters. There are many words in the Torah that have large letters. There are some words in the Torah that have small letters. Like Avei Yikra has a small letter. We know that, for example, in Shema, there are two words with big letters, the Ayin and the Dalet, which of course is aid, because we're giving Eidos to HaKadosh Baruch Hu's unity. That's true. But the tzaddikim say that there is a direct connection between two words in the Torah that have large letters, and they have large letters for the very same reason. One of those words is the word Echad in Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, and that is a large Dalet. And there's another word where HaKadosh Baruch Hu says you mustn't turn to El Acher, to foreign other gods, meaning to duality, to polytheism. And the Reish in the word Acher is large. And the Sfarim say that they're large for the same reason, because it's either Echad or it's Acher, and these two words have the same letter at the end that look very similar. And you can make very easily a mistake between thinking, is there one God, which means is everything one? Is there unity in my life? Does all the things that I'm going through, both the positive and the negative, come from one source? Or chas v'shalom el acher? And there's just that very tiny little differentiating factor between the letter Dalet and the letter Reish, which is that little bit that comes out of the Dalet, which the Reish doesn't have because it curves. That little bit is called in the Sfarim a kaitz. That's a kaitz of the letter, right? That's the little bit that sticks out of the end is called a kaitz, which literally means a thorn, but it's that little bit that is additional in the Dalet that you don't have in the Reish. And that's the differentiating factor between the letter Reish and the letter Dalet, and therefore between the word Echad and the word Acher, right? Two-thirds of which are the same, right? But that last letter is different, Echad and Acher. And that's the differentiating factor is the kaitz. Fascinatingly enough, this is not only true physically, which, like we expressed, is the literal difference between the Dalet and the Reish, but it's true numerically. Because the Dalet is 4, a Reish is 200, and kaitz is Gematria 196. So the kaitz is not only the physical difference between Dalet and Reish, it is the numeric difference between Dalet and Reish, and we have to be very careful not to blur the line between the Dalet and the Reish. Adam and Chava eat from the Eitz Hadas. So Chava, we already covered, says Hanacha Shishiyani. HaKadosh Baruch Hu comes to Adam and he says, what did you do? Now you ate from the tree, there's going to be consequences. And he says, it's not going to be easy to make parnasa. You know why? Because because thorns and thistles are going to sprout for you. Say the Sfarim, the kites. You've been impacted by Amalek who's attacking the kites, who's attacking that little thorn that differentiates between the Dalet and the Reish, and therefore, v'dar tatzmiach. You're going to have to battle with Dalet Reish. Your whole life, you're going to be going back and forth between the Dalet and the Reish. Says the pasuk, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, Ki yad al keska. There's a hand that's on the throne of God. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is making a shvuah. Melchama la'Hashem ba'Amalek midar dar. HaKadosh Baruch Hu has a battle against Amalek in every generation. If you look in the Chumash, those two words dar are without a vav. It's dar. the same thing. The whole thing of Amalek is to cause us to fall into suffix, to cause us to lose our emunah. What's the whole inyan of being stuck in a place below emunah? Is to have our yadayim, which is the b'china of koichi va'otzim yadi asali asachai lazeh, which is why Rav Nassim says in Likutei Halachos that the tumah of shena comes on the hands specifically, because to fall asleep is to fall to a lower state of consciousness, and memela there's a tumah that comes on the yadayim, because when I'm in a sleep state and I'm not in emunah, that means that I think that I'm the one actually doing things. Memela, a person sleeps, you wake up in the morning, there's tumah on your hands. How do you get the tumah off of your hands? Netilas yadayim. Netilas yadayim is mayim. Mayim is the consciousness of emunah. Ki mala aretz deya l'das Hashem kamayim liyamachasim. This is exactly what we're doing every single morning before we start our day, is to take these hands that I think are busy doing things in the world and to wash them with meimei hadas, with waters of intellect. And then I can start my day as a yid, because I recognize this is my mission in the world, is to do things, but to recognize as I do them that really HaKadosh Baruch Hu is doing them. Like it says by the Mishkan, that Moshe Rabbeinu was putting up the Mishkan. The Medrash Tanchuma says Moshe Rabbeinu came to Hashem, he says, let's be honest, you know that I can't put up the Mishkan. As Moshe said, he said, nobody in Klal Yisrael could do it. They brought it to Moshe. Moshe said to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, I can't either do it. Hashem says, I know. He says, pretend like you're doing it and I'll do it. And that's mamish, the template for all of our lives. Like, just pretend like you're doing it. And from the standpoint of Shabbos, kilu kol malachtecha asuya, like all your work was done, isn't done. It was done. It was done for you. But everything is HaKadosh Baruch Hu. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is running the world, and that's how we begin our day, by washing our yadayim. But ultimately, those are the yadayim that are below our das. Those are the yadayim that are below, right? Where I think that I can understand things. I think that this world makes sense to my rational brain, and that's the way that I act based on my subjective understanding and reasoning of things. Ultimately, the way to battle against Amalek, the Yad of Emunah, is that Moshe Rabbeinu takes his yadayim, the koich va'otzim yadi, and he lifts it above his head. To say that ultimately I recognize that there are things that are going on in my life and things that are going on in the world and experiences that we've had nationally and collectively that are completely beyond my capacity to understand. And in that moment, the tzaddikim say, I'm connecting to the Eitz HaChaim, the Eitz Chaim Hilam HaChazikim Ba. That's the tree of objective clarity. That's the tree of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's perspective. And that's the Eitz HaChaim. That's Moshe Rabbeinu battling against the suffix and the das and the intellect and the kriros of Amalek by lifting our hands above, to overcome the Sheba Yipol Tzadik V'Kam that Rabbi Nachman tells us is Sefer Tevis Amalek. Right, who's trying to always push people down below into the bechina of koich va'otzim yadi. Moshe lifts his yadayim and he lifts them above his head, a bechina of netilas yadayim. Mamish su'u yedechem kodesh. Right, like some have a minute to say after washing hands. Su'u yedechem kodesh baruch Hashem. He lifts his hands beyond. Says the Sfas Emes in the name of the Chidush Arim. But this will end b'siyata d'shmaya. He says he heard from his grandfather, the Chidush Arim, that what it means, chayev inish lebesume bepuria ad de lo yada, he says, ad de lo eitz ha das toivera, ad de lo yada, is to overcome the sin of the Eitz Hadas Toivera, the Zuamas HaNachash, the Bechina of Hishiyani, of Hayesh and Ayin, the Zuama of Koitz V'Dardar Tatzmiachlach, and to get to a place beyond the Eitz Hadas Toivera, to a place of true Emunah. That's what it means. Chayiv inish l'besumi b'poria ad de lo yada, until you're in a place where you've risen beyond the limitations of the intellect, and you're capable of connecting yourself and myself and ourselves to the Eitz HaChaim. HaKadosh Baruch Hu should bless us with a Purim that's absolutely saturated with true Emunah and the Yishav Hadas that comes with Emunah, and that the whole Chodesh Adar, not just until Purim, but we shouldn't forget after Purim also, until the end of the month is full of Simcha, because Misha Nichnas Adar Marvin B'Simcha, and the Tzaddikim say Adar is Aleph Dar. When I'm able to climb out of the Daled Reish and I'm able to connect to the Aleph, to the Alufa Shel Olam, this is the Simcha of Adar. It should be a Yantiv that's full of Yeshuas and Nachamas for ourselves individually and for all of Klal Yisrael. Be as Tzaddik B'Meir V'Yameinu. Amen V'Amen.